Talk to me about leading up to the time you were drafted and how old you were and what the circumstances were.
Well, I was probably a year older than everybody else who was drafted. You were eligible when you turned 18. They could take you immediately.
Well, Ken,
What?
start with your dad leaving, then what did your mother do and what did you do?
What did I do?
Yeah.
We just stayed at home here, and
How soon did she leave?
and then when school was out, we all got on the train and went back to Arlington, Virginia.
So, had you graduated from high school then?
Yes,
So you graduated
in '42,
in 42.
and then went back there. And I remember one of the most dramatic days of my life. We'd every morning at a certain time while I was in the Army, we'd fall in the Battery Street or wherever we were, and the officers would call the roll. This one morning they didn't call the roll. They said, when a high-ranking officer got up and announced, "You all need to know that yesterday morning in France, a massive Allied army invaded in Normandy, and there are men being killed, and the end of the war is we've been getting ready this for I remember thinking, this is a very momentous thing. Men are losing their lives by the thousands over there, and
Well, the invasion of Normandy was when the Germans invaded, right?
no, when the Americans invaded Normandy.
This is while you were in the Army already.
That's while I was at Fort Sill, yeah.
So you took the train with your mom and siblings?
Yeah,
Was that right after school?
yes.
What did you do all that summer?
I don't remember. Maybe I joined them later. Maybe I worked here. But anyway, that fall, in 1942, in the fall, I was a freshman at George Washington University.
Okay. I wondered why you went to George Washington's, because you were living there.
That's right. I was living in Arlington, and one of the most fascinating things I observed, most of the time I'd ride in with my dad in the morning and go to school and then ride the bus back. And when we hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge across the Potomac River, when we get to the other side to the Virginia side of the river, the bus driver would stop. If there were any colored people in it, they had to move to the back. And he wouldn't go on till they all moved. And the few times I rode in with him, when we got to the end of the bridge, he would stop and say, if there are any colored people on this bridge, on this bus, you can now sit anywhere you want to. They did that every time. That was, I'm not particularly bothered about it. I just thought it very interesting. I didn't know why they were worried about him. And I remember reading once, you know this famous Roe versus Wade? Some smart aleck said that was a study by the War Department as to how's the best way to cross the Potomac River.
Right. So tell me more about your freshman year at George Washington.
It was fascinating that I learned to study while I was there in this physics class, and I discovered that I loved. There was a I took a class in English history, and I loved to listen to that guy, and I did good in that. I don't remember anything about it now, except that he led us clear through the whole history of Great Britain, and all their kings and all the stuff they did, their wars with Napoleon. And I remember years later when we were ready to go on a mission, I got a hold of the Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
It celebrated the victory of the Russians over the French who had invaded Russia. And I used to play it to the missionaries.
One day, it was playing. We were in the kitchen dining area, and it was playing in the family room.
In the mission home.
And I peeked in, and one of the missionaries was just leading the orchestra like crazy. He's so cute.
They were such delightful people. They were all smart. A few of them were not. That was not their fault. But they were all such good, nice kids. Except the one who couldn't stop drinking iced tea, and I had to send him home.
Did you have a major already chosen your freshman year, or was that later?
For a while, I thought I would like to be a physicist because I was enjoying physics so much. But I very shortly after I thought about the possibilities of that, I realized I'd never be able to do it because I'm not good at math. I did terrible in high school algebra. I signed up for some kind of a math class at George Washington, and I just couldn't do it, Jordan. I tried hard and I studied hard. I finally had to drop the class. And I knew that I would not ever make it as a physicist because math is a very important part of it. But I loved history. I tolerated freshman English. Maybe you've heard me tell that story, but that we were assigned to write a theme, a paper. And the young professor was giving us instructions on how we were to do it, and et cetera, and et cetera. And then he said, and I need to have a personal interview with each one of you and talk to you in person. So he was setting this up, and he said, then he turned to me and said, Mr. Udall, could you come in on Thursday after school? And before I could answer, he said, oh, you won't be here, will you? I said, I think so. Why? And he said, well, Mr. Greenbaum and Finkelstein are not coming. I assumed you wouldn't either. My dad was so tickled by that. He said, you think it was the nose or the name that got you classed with those two Jewish boys? I don't remember if that's the names, but it was two obviously Jewish names. And there was a guy in the army with me. I presume he was killed in Malmedy, named Moose Johnson. He was a graduate, or he had been an engineering student at not Brigham Young, Notre Dame. And I remember once he and I were having an argument about something. I said, Moose, I never heard of that. And he said, are you offering that as proof of non-existence? And I didn't have an answer for him. I just laughed. John Carr something or other Morrison. Everybody called him Moose. And the sad thing happened while we were in the Philippines. We were living in big tents somewhere. And we had a young second lieutenant. His dad was a general somewhere over in the Philippines. And this kid was fascinated with guns. And during the noon hour one time, he was cleaning his .45 pistol, and he looked down it to see if it looked clean down the barrel, and it went off, and what it killed him, but it took a long time for him to die. What they finally determined, what it did, it went in above his eye, around his skull, and came out the top of his head, and that it hit so hard like that it broke his neck, and that's what killed him. We heard this loud bang and him falling off of his bed, and there was panic for a few minutes. At first we thought he had killed himself, but his dad came and talked to some of us about his son, and what a blow that was. I remember one time I was ready to fight somebody. I'm not a fighter. I had a fight when I was in grade school. Some Mexican kid kept taunting me, and finally I said to myself, it doesn't matter if I cry or what, I'm going to have to fight this kid. So I said, okay, let's go. And I was crying still, and we started hitting each other, and we did that for about a minute and a half, and both got tired of it and walked away. That's it. But they would send us out to the firing range to become proficient in the use of the .45 automatic pistol. It was a big, heavy pistol, and I was terrible. I never could get it to go where I wanted it to, and so the supply sergeant, I can't remember his name now, but he was a smart aleck, and he would check the pistol out to me, and I'd go to the firing range. When I bring it back, I'd always turn it in. I didn't want to have to buy that pistol. Anyway, he came where I was, and he said, you didn't turn that pistol in. I said, I did. I gave it to you at such and such time. He said, you're a liar, and he turned and walked away. And I was so mad, if I could have got out of that trailer fast enough, I'd have fought with him, but he was twice as big as me. I was just furious that he'd called me a liar and a thief. Anyway, that's the only time I was ever mad enough to fight anybody. And it happened just like that.
Yeah.
He triggered my anger. Oh, dear.
I need a short break. Okay, so you're living at home, going to George Washington.
Yeah.
And what's next?
Well, when I finished that year, I fully expected to be drafted. And I came back out here and lived with Uncle Dave and Aunt Ella Lee and worked on the farm for Uncle Anthony Lee. I think that's what anyway. And in the end of June, I was sent, my number came up, and I went, and that's when I was determined to be 4F. And my dad came out here on a visit in the fall. By then I had enrolled at EA as a sophomore. I was the only sophomore in the school, and anyway, that's when he said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, the simple thing to do is not do anything and not go in the Army. But I said, I just don't feel comfortable with that. Everybody else is going, and I probably ought to too. And he said, I agree. He said, I've talked with General Tuthill. He's the head of the Selective Service. He told me if you would, you'll consent to it, he'll draft you again, and he will come and examine you personally, and if you pass, you'll go ahead and be drafted. So that's what I did, and that's how I got into the Army. I remember one of the very difficult days of my life. I got on the train here, and in those days we had a passenger train, ran from here to Bowie, and hit the main line out there. Anyway, I got on this train here, and said goodbye to all the girls who were my classmates at EA, which was Gila College in those days. And as I got about 3 or 4 miles out of town going towards Bowie, I suddenly got homesick, And I thought I was going to die. I felt so bad, you know. I'm all alone. I'm going to go off and meet the world head on, and I don't have any friends, and my family's not. It was a terrible, terrible experience, and that stayed with me for 3 or 4 days till I left. We went to Fort MacArthur, California, which is on the coast out there between Los Angeles and San Pedro or somewhere. And they gave us that's where I took my first, what do they call it when you test your intelligence?
It looks like I have
Is it the
one.
IQ test?
IQ. And mine was 125 or something, whatever. I don't know why I remembered that. It wasn't something I was proud of or ashamed of, but I remembered that's what I had. And then because I had physics, I didn't go into the infantry. I went to this field artillery special school for because all the guys in our class at Fort Sill, basic training, were engineering students from somewhere, either graduates or guys who had been majoring in engineering and who knew what they were doing. We didn't really need it there, but they had to send somebody there to do that. And I remember there were about 7,000 of us lined up in this huge grass field next to the railroad track. And they started reading the names through a big loudspeaker. The first 170 or something couldn't read or write. And they were sent to a special school somewhere to teach them to read and write. And the next 29, it went on and on and on. They were going to Fort Benning, Georgia, the infantry basic training. They were going to somewhere in Northern California, the infantry, and I could just see myself going to infantry basic training, and it was too late to do anything. And I kept saying to myself, well, if I have to do it, I'll do it. And but I don't want any German shooting at me with a big rifle, or a Japanese with a bayonet on them. And so right near the end, when there were only 150 of us left out there, then they called off these list of names, and I was on it. And they said, you're going to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to a field artillery school. And I thought, well, that's better than infantry. But I remember what a sad, sad week that was for me, all alone out there in the big, cruel world, with no friends. No. I remember one of the things that happened. We slept in a big 2-story barracks, and some guy came in and left the door open. Somebody way down on the other end said, "Close the door. Were you raised in a barn?" And the other guy said, "Yeah." And the first thing I heard was a jackass bray. Everybody laughed so loud we almost couldn't go to sleep. Oh dear. There are so many funny things that happened in the Army. Turn it off. I'm going to tell you another one. Now what?
Okay, so just so I get the timeline right, so when did you actually get onto the train to leave Thatcher?
It was it was the end of one semester at Gila Junior College. I had had 1 year at George Washington and 1 semester here, so I'd had a year and a half of college. And then I got on the train, and from then on I was in the Army.
Okay. All right, so this was like after the Christmas holiday, or?
Yes.
Okay. In 1943.
42. Yeah, it probably was early in 43.
Okay. Okay, so you went to Fort Sill.
Yeah.
So you were assigned to go to Fort Sill. And
Yeah.
Because you were in California.
That's right.
And that's where they assigned you.
That's right.
Okay. So pick up the story from there.
Well, then we went to, I can just remember there were two or three. By then, I was not a little runt anymore, and I was pretty fast. There was one guy in Thatcher School that was faster than me. I was so startled when I discovered he was gradually pulling away from me as we were running somewhere. But I was quite fast for a kid. And so when I got back there, I really threw myself into the calisthenics and the close order drill, and I'd always liked guns. And we had you know what a carbine is? It's a rifle, an M1, what it was called in those days, was a big, tall, heavy 30 caliber gun. It was automatic, and the little carbine was only weighed 5 or 6 pounds. It was only about this tall, and I think it was 30 caliber, but the shell, the bullet was only about that long, whereas the rifle bullet was big. It carried lots of powder, lots of whatever the powder that sent the bullet out the thing. And I was a sharpshooter. I was very good at that. I explained to some of the guys who were around me. I said, "What you need to do is sight this rifle in. Don't just assume it'll be cocked perfectly, but when we would go practice, then we would, they'd had open sights." And I said to some of my I made friends everywhere. I said, "You aim right at the center of that bullseye and shoot it, and then they tell you where it goes." The guys down at the end. And I said, if every time it goes off here, then you aim the other direction. You aim instead of to the center, and it's up here. You aim low and to the left, and pretty soon you can get where you can hit the bullseye every time. And it worked. Anyway, I enjoyed that. It was a little old pop gun, and we weren't going to scare anybody with it, but we carried it around with us. And a lot of close order drill, a lot of calisthenics, and a lot of classroom work, learning about this big machine we had. It was about this long, and it had some legs and it stood about this tall, and it had I can't remember the names of the things, but what it would do, you surveyed in what was called a mic base, and you had and you'd go out and dig a hole in the ground and set this microphone in it, cover it with canvas and dirt so they couldn't see it. Then there was a telephone line went from each one of those back to your machine. So that the theory behind this is, if a shell went off over here, then as the sound traveled through here, it would hit this one first, and this one next, and this one next. And somebody had figured out the formula that then they put it through this machine that we called it a Rube Goldberg machine, and it printed out a little paper tape about that wide, so you could, and it was accurate. You could tell exactly. They've surveyed this mic base, so you know exactly where each one of those was, and then this you could pinpoint where it came from, where that noise came from.
Yeah.
My job, I was a forward observer, corporal. There were two of us, and we didn't go together. We were by ourselves, and we went up. We'd go out in front of the infantry's front lines, and on the end of a telephone line with a special telephone that had a button on it, and they would get us on the phone and said, "We're now going to try to pick up, listen and hear this gun that's going off over here to your right." And we would hear it, and we'd say, "Yeah, we hear it." They'd say, "That's the one. The next time it comes, you push your button down, start this machine." So when we would hear that gun, we'd punch the button and say, "On the way, over." And they'd start the machine. and then that's how it worked. It was kind of a Rube Goldberg outfit, but it worked. And then the same thing with your own artillery shells. Wherever they landed, you could pinpoint that.
Right.
And
Time out.
time out.
Sean Nielsen on the.
These exercises you were doing, were they part of your training?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And that was at Fort Sill.
yeah. And we were doing an obstacle course, and we'd run from the edge of the bank of a little stream. From the edge, we'd jump out and grab the rope and swing across the drop on the other side. And I was doing that, and I lost my grip on the rope and fell, and landed like this and broke my arm, the distal end of the left radius or whatever it was, and I was just furious with myself for being that dumb. And it didn't hurt a whole bunch, except I knew it was. You could see it was crooked. It was literally broken. And so I spent 6 weeks in the hospital. In those days, in the Army, they don't mess around with you. If you have a broken bone, they put you in the hospital. There was a colored guy in there who had a broken leg. I learned 2 card tricks from him that I've never forgotten, and he told more stories that I have forgotten. He was such a comedian. I almost hated to leave that hospital because he was so much fun to be around, that guy. Oh dear. I had to show you those 2 card tricks. One of them is you have to really study it, memorize it to make it work. But when you do, people think you're a genius.
All right. Before I leave, I want to see that.
All right. Let me just tell you this. There are 4 words in connection with it: Bible, goose, thigh, and steel. But that doesn't mean anything to you till I explain how those work together and why it works. I never did know that guy's name, but he hobbled around the pool table and he hobbled around the card table. He had a broken leg up high and he had a huge cast on his leg. I think he was tickled to death to be in the hospital rather than whatever else he was doing. And when we got through basic training at Fort Sill, we were sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was right near the southern boundary of Missouri and Arkansas. And we were there for about 4 months. And then they loaded us all up in trucks again and sent us back to Fort Sill. They had decided then to use us as school troops rather than send us off to some military assignment somewhere. So then I was at Fort Sill for another year or so. And we didn't leave there until the following June. And we got on an old troop train. The sides were wooden. I mean, it was really old. They'd resurrected it from somewhere. And but we went through. I remember we went through Tucson and Yuma, and then up through California to wherever we were, just out of San Francisco. I remember when we were there 2 or 3 days, and they took us on a big barge of some kind, and went around through the San Francisco Bay to where this ship was we were going to go across on. It was a big. It was called an APA, Assault Personnel Assault or something. APA 213, the USS Montrose. I always remembered that. Years later, when all of you kids, we went to San Diego and were doing a tour of the harbor on a boat or some little ship, And here came the old USS Montrose in the bay, and I was so startled to see that same old ship.
Wow.
What a coincidence.
So you were a year. You said it was school troops. What does that mean?
We put on demonstrations for over and over for officers who had come there to take training in field artillery.
Okay.
Most of them were infantry officers, and I came to the conclusion that a GI overcoat was not for warmth; it was a sieve. That's the coldest I've ever been, sitting out on a hill up there, and there weren't very many hills, but they'd get us on a hill where we could hear the sound, and we'd do it at night, and the wind would blow, and we'd be cold, and in the wintertime, I'd come in at 4 in the morning, and I wonder if I was ever going to get warm again, you know.
Yeah.
And I even tried to drink coffee once, because they brought us all into the mess hall, and they had all this warm smell of coffee that looked so good and smelled good. I took one sip, and I thought, I don't care if I'm a Mormon boy or not. I need to warm up. And so I took a sip of that coffee, and it was terrible. That was never any temptation to me. Tea or coffee or smoking. They never tempted me in the very least.
You were there a year, so that meant it was, you said June of 44?
Yes, and when we got to the Philippines at the end of June, the war ended in September, I think, of 44, or whatever, maybe it's 45, I can't remember. Anyway, after we had been there for 2 or 3 months, the war ended. They dropped the 2 bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the war ended. And so we were told, after the war ended, we were told that we were scheduled to be involved in the invasion of the southern island of Japan on November the 4th. That we were to go in on the 3rd day, and that the military experts predicted that the Allied casualties would have been 500,000 men, either killed or wounded in that invasion. And so, years later, somebody was challenging Harry Truman, who was the president who made that decision to drop those 2 bombs. They said, you know, wouldn't it have been better to do something else, or to whatever, drop them over an island in the Pacific instead of killing all those people? He said, I give you three sentences. I was there. I made the decision. I would do it again. He didn't argue with anybody. And I thought that, we were dropping incendiary bombs on Tokyo and just burning everything. And why not? This is war. Why not drop those bombs that killed 70,000 in one blast? We didn't ask for them to invade us, to do Pearl Harbor, or to kill all the soldiers they had killed. I remember reading that one of the turning points in the whole war with Japan was called Guadalcanal. We had landed a whole bunch of Marines or something there, and had occupied the top of a hill overlooking the airfield, what the Japanese had built there. And they'd sent some troops to try to take it back, and they failed. So they imported a crack Japanese infantry group. They were going to have to take this hill back. And for 3 days they tried and failed. And from that point on, we knew we could fight their very best and succeed. And they were tough battlers. Have I ever told you I've forgotten the name of the other forward observer, Corporal. He was about my same age and my same size. And he and I got to talking one day, and we said, you know what? We're going to be out in front of the lines like this with our little carbine.
Hello.
Suppose some Japanese infantry come along with a bayonet. We need to have some training of that, in that. And so at least we'll have a shot at it, And old Captain Sanders, he was a very dark-complected man. he said, "Boys," he said, "let me tell you about that." He said, "The combat life of a forward observer is 25 seconds."
Now you can take it.
He said, "You don't need any bayonet training. Go on back and forget it." So we did. Oh dear. But I never entertained the idea that I would be killed in the war. I just never did. I knew it was not going to happen to me. I was an optimist, a cockeyed optimist, whatever that means. Who came in? It must have been Curtis and
It's Grandpa.
Clifton, or is it Brooks?
So what were you doing in the Philippines?
What was I doing?
Yeah.
Well, for the first little while, we were just sitting there waiting for this invasion. And then the minute the war ended, we became military police. They moved us into just on the outskirts of Manila to a big Catholic seminary of some kind where they had trained priests over the years. And so we were stationed there, and then we were guarding Liberty ships as they unloaded in Manila Bay. And that's where I was when I got the piece of glass in my eye, and it got me sent home very quickly.
How did you get the glass in your eye?
My dad told me not to tell this story anymore.
Why is that?
It involved a beer bottle. We were guarding the load of a Liberty ship that was loaded with beer, the 3.2 beer, or whatever. They called it that, and there's some other stuff they served us in the chow hall that was kind of pink-looking lemonade. Anyway, they called it Grand Coulee. And somebody said, "What's that mean?" He said, "Damn, near water."
Sidetrack.
Anyway, what was I about to tell you?
You got that glass in your eye.
Anyway, everybody was given an allotment of so many bottles of beer I think they gave you a bottle a day. And a carton of cigarettes every month. And I traded the cigarettes to the Filipinos. I brought home 2 or 3 carvings of wood and stuff, and I don't remember what all. But and the beer bottles, these Filipino, they were hired as dock workers, and they were loading the cases of beer into the big whatever they were called that they lowered down into the hole. Then they'd bring them up, and the Filipinos would haul them into a case at a time into a truck where they'd be spread around. And I was a military police. I was standing guard, and we were supposed to. They would hide them and take them home with them at night, And we weren't mad at them. We were just doing our job. And I found 3 or 4 of them that they'd hid somewhere in a pile of rope, and I called to my companion down on the first deck below me. I was out on top. And the deck opening in these Liberty ships is probably 40 or 50 feet across. And then it sticks up above the deck about this far. And then there's a heavy plate metal that goes down in about 15 feet and stops. And so I had 4 or 5 of these bottles, and I was throwing them down to my partner, my buddy, whatever he was. He was standing in the first deck below, and I was throwing this across to him, and one of them hit the bottom of that thing.
Are you guys going?
And when he did this, one eye immediately went fuzzy. I thought, oh gosh, I got beer in that eye. So I leaned over like that, pulled on my eyelash, and a drop of blood hit the deck. And so I knew I was in trouble. So I called to somebody and said, "I've got a problem." And they put me in an ambulance real quick. just on the outskirts of Manila, there was a huge general hospital. And I can still remember the name of the doctor, Dr. Van Zandt. He was an eye specialist. And he very quickly, he sewed the cut. You can still see it if you look closely. It goes across, just across the bottom of the colored part of your eye, so that it cut that, and then the glass fell out. And I was almost blind in that eye. But he kept me awake while he sewed it up, and I could see his hand come down and the needle go, and I couldn't feel anything. And he sewed it up, and while I was there in that operating room, I had the sudden memory. My cousin Morris Udall, you know who he is.
Yeah.
And his mother and my mother were sisters, and his dad and my dad were half brothers. He had got a pocket knife in one of his eyes when he was a teenager. They'd been trying to cut a rope and it threw, and he lost that eye completely. They took it clear out. And I remembered being told that he got infection in the other eye, and that there was a danger that he was going to be blind. And I got to worrying about that, and here I am halfway around the world in not very sanitary conditions. I wonder if that's going to happen to me. And I, the more I thought about it, the more I worried about it, and I about half panicked. And I prayed as I had never prayed before, that the doctor would know what to do, and that I wouldn't. I figured I'd already lost that one eye, and but as I laid there, I received a very positive reassurance that I would not lose the other eye, and that was a deeply moving experience for me as I lay there in that huge hospital on the outskirts of Manila. So on the eye charts, there's the great big E at the top.
Yeah.
I can't read that
Really?
with this eye. In fact, right now, there's a black spot right in the middle. I have peripheral vision, and it lets me have fairly good depth perception with two eyes, But I'm almost totally blind in this right eye. For a long time, it stayed so open that I would get a headache if I didn't wear dark glasses.
Yeah.
And but that's changed, and I don't have to wear dark glasses anymore. But then very shortly they flew me across the Pacific in those days the heavy transport. There was a C-47, which was the two-engined transport plane. Then the C-54 was four-engined. It was the forerunner of the airliner things. And so it took us 4 days to cross the Pacific. We flew from Manila to Guam, and from Klondike, Wainuitok, and from Wainuitok to Johnson Island, and from Johnson Island to Honolulu. And then they put me off because I was not one of the sickest ones. And I waited overnight in the hospital there and flew in the next morning to San Francisco, and then was transferred a couple of days later up to there was a big Bushnell General Hospital just on the outskirts of Ogden, Utah. Big red brick building, 3 or 4 stories tall, and so I flew to there, and then before too much longer I was discharged and went home. That all seems like a faraway dream now.
When you broke your arm, when you got done with that, did you go back with your same group, or did you? No,
I tried. I said to the captain, the men I'd been training with were still there. I said, let me just, I can pick this up and go right on with them. I didn't want to have to break in a new bunch of men. He said, no, I don't have any choice. He said, you go back with this next bunch. Are you aware of what had happened to that bunch? Those that I was training with?
Yes, but I want to hear it again.
Okay, they were, but when they finished basic training, they were immediately sent to England. They were involved in the invasion of Normandy, and after we got to moving into France, and had been there for several weeks, the Germans launched what was called the Battle of the Bulge. They sent massive troops and armor and surrounded a whole bunch of our men. I've forgotten the name of the general. They called on him to surrender, and he gave them a one-word answer. He said, "Nuts." The German general said to somebody else, "What does that mean?" He said, "That's a smart aleck way of saying no." Anyway, these guys that I had trained with, I can't remember any of them's name now, but they were captured in that Battle of the Bulge. And when the Germans discovered that they were losing and they were going to have to fall back, they took these guys. They were on the outskirts of a little town called Malmedy. They took this observation battalion, 600 or 400 or however many men there were. They took them out in the field and machine gunned them all. There were 2 or 3 who survived, and I'd have been with them. I'd have been right there if it hadn't have been for that broken arm. The world ain't fair. I've said, my wife and I've said to each other, why us? How come the Lord has been good to us? Why us? We have excellent children. We have great-grandchildren. We've been blessed with excellent church experiences. Why us? Why not somebody else? And part of that is, well, why did I not have to go over there to Malmedy and be part of that nonsense? There was 2 officers who were in charge of that. They were both executed after the Nuremberg trials because they had that was pure murder. Anyway, I've thought of that a lot of times during my adult life. What else do you want to know, Jordan?
After you got back, what did you do next?
My dad had a farm down to Eden that Jim Foster was running. I worked down there. I came back at the end of February or something and worked down there. When school started in the fall, I went to the University of Arizona. Lived in Yavapai Hall. I needed some more credits to be able to be eligible to go to law school. And I went one year and took enough more classes that I then had the 65 hours or whatever it took to get into law school. And then the following September I started law school. And it was very interesting to me. In those days, anybody who'd been in the Army, they would pay you a salary and pay your tuition in any school you wanted to go to. There must have been 8 or 10 men that I knew them well, who went to law school with me that first semester. Every one of them flunked out. They didn't know how to study. They weren't suited to it or something. But anyway, they didn't make it.
How did you decide to go to law school?
It was kind of a family thing, you know. My dad and his brothers and etc. But I went to him during that the time from March till school started, and I had a long talk with him. I said, lawyers are not held in very high regard. I'm not sure if I want to be a lawyer. He gave me a very simple answer. He said, all the more reason why we need a good and honest one. And I couldn't argue with that. And he'd been a very kindly, good, successful man at it, and so I decided, well, it's good training. I'll do it. When I got out of law school and started to practice, I hated every minute of it. I could not do it. I knew I was not going to succeed as a lawyer, and that's when I quit. I stayed here about a year and a half, and quit.
What did you dislike about it?
I'm not sure if I could put it into words. It was not that I disliked lawyers. There was something about my personality and my something. I didn't feel like I fit in. I couldn't get involved in it. I couldn't enjoy it. Why didn't I, Mom? She's still over there?
Part of the reason was because you weren't given any real cases. You were the gopher.
I tried to talk to my dad about that, and he didn't know what I was talking about. But the minute I said I've decided, Dad, that I don't want to practice law, he immediately said, fine, what can I do to help you? I said, I want to farm. He said, let me help you get some land. Don't try to farm here. You go down to the Mesa area, and we'll help you get some land down there. So he did. And so there we are.
So you went down there and farmed. How much land did you have, and what did you farm?
Cotton, some grains, but mostly cotton, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't know how to tell you why I did, but there were cotton gins every place you looked. And they were anxious to help you. If you needed help buying more land, they would help you. And I acquired quite a bit of land down there. And I paid $900 an acre for 160 acres of land. That's probably worth $300,000 an acre now, out south of Gilbert a ways. And about 4 years later,
it might be worth $30,000 an acre, not 300.
Oh no, it's worth more than 30. Anyway, about 5 or 6 years after that, I sold it for $4,000 an acre, and I thought I was the sharpest businessman in the world.
10 years later, it was selling for the 30 and 40 and 50,000.
And 10 years after that, it was selling for 100.
No, it quit after that.
No, it didn't.
The market went down.
Well, it went back up again. Anyway, some of that land down there is huge prices. Eldon Cooley sold the last piece of farmland he had down there for $300,000 an acre. Somebody told me.
Your computer's running, did you know it?
Yep. Well, I have more questions for you about farming and ranching in your 20s and 30s, but I'm out of tape, so
No, be here in a minute.
we'll continue